Welcome back, Sheena and Erica.
Thanks, Jade.
Sure.
Thank you, Jade.
The symposium forms part of a larger project called Undercover of Darkness, whose first iteration is an exhibition at the Slave Lodge, which is still on. An artwork by Azazole and Damase forms part of this exhibition, and it's in an embellished blue worker's jacket. And this motif of workwear pops up in the Spring Queen documentary. There's a moment when a shop steward notes that after the pageant, the ball gown has to be packed away and the overalls must be put back on Monday. And of course, Erica gestured to this the sort of controlling of the body of uniforms. Could you perhaps speak to the importance of those moments where we do have agency over our dress?
Jade, are you addressing that to me?
To everyone, but you're welcome to start off.
Okay, no, I was just listening to Kwesi, and I was just really struck by the power that dress does and the power that fashion does to kind of take something and disrupt the narrative, interrupt it, and the necessity to not the necessity, the capacity to be able to do that through dress, and reflecting on the Spring Queen films, specifically that moment and what that fashion or dress does in that engagement on the ramp, or in that engagement in the public sphere. So it is an incredibly important tool, and that's why as a historic garment, I think it is just really important for us to recognize how it has oppressed, and what these moments of disruption can do. And so I'm interested in thinking through, is there something that's shifting currently around identity constructs, power dynamics, through that the same object that was used as an oppressive garment. Yeah.
Jade, can I say something?
Of course.
Again, this takes us back to a project that both Erica and you worked on with the movie snaps. These photographs of women and men in the city center getting dressed up to the nines during apartheid, or in fact from about the 30s. So it kind of is an archive of fashion, but it's also an archive of the counter narrative of South Africa's history. And we see in these ordinary domestic photographs how people use fashion to represent themselves and to represent themselves in other ways. And I think Spring Queen, as well as the uniforms that are the way Erica's presentation that it spoke to, it speaks about work as a different kind of intellectual, or it allows us as scholars to think of this kind of labor as a different kind of intellectual endeavor, that we don't simply put it as we don't simply put to it a set of assumptions about the wearers, that we allow these objects that could be objects of captivity, let's say the overalls that domestic workers use, or that machinists have to wear, in fact, even prison overalls, to dig beneath these objects. And it forces us to think about performativity, and how the wearers of these objects move through space and move through our lives in ways that touch on all of us, even as those of us who are just looking at it and studying it in all its kinds of ways. So I think Erica, I concur with you. It's essential that we look to this mode of re-representation, especially as we struggle with who South Africa is at this stage. We don't know who the benchmark citizen is. We don't know who belongs. I think we're grasping at all kinds of straws to make sense of a South Africa that's beset by all kinds of fault lines. And we need to look to the unexpected such as fashion and wearing of these objects and these garments that clothe us, that cover us, that in some ways can act as a shield, a buffer against all kinds of things, but in many other ways act as further yokes of oppression, such as the domestic workers, overalls and so forth.
Lizzie, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I see it happening. I see the change happening where there's definitely a conservative side of South Africa that's stuck in their ways and will not acknowledge the change. And then there's a huge side of artists, young people coming up and just like being more free and more accepting of each other. Where I find like I've been all over Cape Town. When I go out dressed as how I want to express myself, believe it or not, like oftentimes like people are like so excited to see me, happy, men and women, families. You know, I recently did a project in Vanguard where it happened actually a week before lockdown, COVID lockdown. I went out in a neon dress and I just walked around like Vanguard and literally like Muslim titis, uncles, children, like were curious, you know, and I kind of wanted to like invigorate that like feeling, because a lot of times in that community there's like a monotony, and I wanted to sort of break that and show like, yo, there's this whole other life outside of this, you know. But I also wanted to show them like this example of a queer person that is happy, that's not like a stereotype of what a queer person is, you know. And that engagement was like amazing, and I found that people were like more accepting than I thought, you know, what they would be. Because, you know, with my auntie in Vanguard, she's Muslim and she's super accepting and loving, and I sort of want to show these examples of like real life change that is happening. It's not just like stuck in the past, you know.
I think a lot of your work, the DJ you do, is about making visible and taking ownership of the city and spaces in the city. Earlier in today's program, the panelists discussed the politics of mapping, both the physical city and the politics of identity. I wonder, Sheena and Erica, what strategies do you employ in your practices to remap the city and encourage those communities to take ownership of the city in ways that Kwesi is doing in his practice?
Yeah, I'm going to jump in. Jade, giving us very difficult questions today. Again, this is not really about Spring Queen, but it speaks to how kind of our work, the way we've done our work, that we really don't wait for people to give us permission to do anything. And we always used to say to you, we ask for, it's easy to ask for forgiveness and permission. We just charge ahead and we just do something. Because if we're going to disrupt anything, we cannot possibly wait from the center of power to give way. It never is. It's not going to happen. That's the way systems continue to operate. So we kind of need to chip away at the edges all the time. And in so doing, I remember that exhibition that we had of Spring Queen at Bircham House at Michaelis. I think it was unlike many art exhibitions. And I think this is 2011, 2012. So things were a little bit, it kind of wasn't the identical way of doing an exhibition, in that there were taxi loads of people who came in from the Cape Flats. There was Kentucky Fried Chicken. The kids were eating, and this wonderful messiness, and I say messiness in a complex way, of life that you need to be imaginative and you need to be resilient in order to survive in the Cape Flats. People so often, the more privileged who live this side of the highway, don't often understand that. You can't survive there unless you are that. And Spring Queen brings that. We brought that to the city. We brought it into the space of UCT. And I remember when we did Miss Gay Western Cape, We had a whole, we had the contestants both at UCT for a workshop. And then we took them up to Rhodes Memorial for a breakfast where Cape Town, or the tourists, they were completely flabbergasted as to what to make of this. So I think it's important to push at that. And it's not simply a spectacle. It's not simply, let's go put this on show and to kind of get a knee-jerk reaction. It is confronting these spaces that have this long, multiple layers of history and conquest and all these kinds of different landscapes, and saying, even if we are only there for a few minutes, we will shape it and change it in a way that hopefully will shift the trajectory of ways of life afterwards. So that's what we kind of do. We just chip away at the edges, and hopefully that center will eventually begin to give way.
Thank you, Sheena. I think so much also not just chipping away at the center, but you're creating images, you're creating story, you're creating evidence, and Kwesi just said exactly the same thing, creating the archive, just making it present. And I think the exhibition that this comes from, this idea that these tiniest of fragments, they really are pieces, but they've been illustrated, demonstrating a far more rich and complex history. And I think just that's really been, so Jade, just to answer your question, that's really been at the heart of what I do is to be able to teach fashion. We need to bring the story to South Africa. We need to bring the story onto our own bodies, into our own histories, into our own narratives, because the uniform taken up in a place like London is a very different kind of narrative. It's a very different kind of claiming of space. And so to think about, what does that mean here? What does it mean on the ground? And what does it mean in the context of our disrupted and very oppressive past? So the kinds of completing these stories are all the fashion stories that have been absent from those history books, from those textbooks, from those archives, and thinking through. So at every single place that is possible to demonstrate that there was a fashion history, that there is a far richer story coming from South Africa.
Thank you, Erica. This last question will wrap up our session, and I do acknowledge that there actually might be no answer to it, but the legacy of slavery is apparent still in many ways, not least of all in industrialized organization of labor. As curators, archivists, and creatives, how do we negotiate this tension in real time as consumers? I know Sheena spoke about reading our clothing labels. Is there any
with you today? I think it's so easy for us in South Africa to pretend that slavery didn't exist. I don't think it is part of our everyday conversation, even though it is evident in every part of our being. We look at, you just look at some of the apartheid laws that were premised on slave laws. You look at gender-based violence, and you realize, then you think about that. During slavery, not one man, slave or non-slave, was convicted or charged or convicted of rape. So the way women are living today and these lives that have scripted us hark back to that. And I think it's incumbent again on those of us interested in this work is to bring home the business of slavery, that this is not a convenient conversation that begins and ends on 1 December every year, where we kind of pay some kind of lip service to the emancipation of slaves. Let's look at the wine industry. Let's look at what is happening every single day in the Western Cape. Let's look at the mining industry, and then realize that when we walking in the waterfront, we're choosing underwear that has been stitched by somebody, and then we're walking along to the liquor store to buy a bottle of wine. Let's think about those women who pay for our convenience and our ways of life every single day. And I don't think it's fair that they pick up the prices all the time.
So it's just about starting with acknowledgement and working.
Yeah, and talking about it every single day. Yes, Cape Town is the way it is because of X, Y, and Z. And if you don't like to hear this, then I think Toronto or Perth or they'd be willing to take you. But otherwise, let's have these tough conversations, because I don't think we can afford another 27 years of standing at the edges of it.
Thank you so much. Before we wrap up, any last comments from our other panelists? Otherwise, I'll hand over to Carine to conclude the day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Queasy.
Thank you, Jade. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Jade. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, panelists.
I want to take this moment just to say thank you to Queasy, to Erica and Sheena, but to everybody involved with this day. From this morning to today, to this afternoon, it has been a really emotional experience actually to be with you in this space today and to talk these things through. But I'm also powerfully struck by a sense of companionship, by a sense of camaraderie that makes me think about the legacy that we were hoping to, in some small way, plant today. And so thank you for everybody who was listening. And we're hoping that you continue in this camaraderie with us, that the legacy that we build or in trying to build in these kinds of conversations are things that get taken up into the world in some way. And important to recognize in this companionship that this was from the outset not supposed to be just an academic seminar or just or that, but that it was important at this mode to understand how intellectual labor and how embodied labor and how the artistic labor and cultural labor, all these things are deeply entangled, and that they are doing work of unlearning, doing work of unpicking, and of forging different kinds of alliances. So I'm very emotional as I'm sitting here today. I'm so immensely thankful and proud of Jade and Nina for all the work that they've done. And my humility to our audience and to our panelists know no bounds. So with that gratitude, thank you very much and have an absolutely wonderful evening further.
Thank you, Carine. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.